Okay, so it's 9:02. And we're recording the meeting. So I want to welcome everybody to our meeting. There are people like Megan Lopez who couldn't be here because the assessment directors are meeting. But she sent something out to you that's pretty important. And if you get it, you should make sure that you email her. The other thing is that's interesting, we're her favorite group. I hate to compare like groups, but she feels like, the work that she does is supported by the work that you do. So I'm going to give you that feedback because that's a really important strategy in relationship to inverting the pyramid and policy being informed by the actual work that teachers and districts are doing. So we're actually going to look at a couple things. The first one is I've asked Jessica Kalin to be here, and she's our new parent engagement person. Hi, Jessica.
Thank you, so.
And so she's going to talk a little bit about a new initiative related to West Ed and schools and parent engagement. So she'll talk about that. And then we have other people. One is Shelley Strahan, who works online teaming and the work for the Utah Virtual Academy. And then we'll also have a broader discussion about the way the new ESL endorsement is providing multiple paths for all of you to actually support the way in which your resources, like instructional coaches, are embedded in the actual practices in schools. And it will be up to you to decide how you're going to do that. And, the technical we can provide. And then we'll have a broader conversation about personalized competency-based learning related to encouraging and valuing heritage languages for of our students in our communities who are multilingual learners. I have a Zoom class, independent study, and the student that I'm working with is at East High. So I've been working with him for 2 years. His father is a postdoc at the University of Utah in biological research. And the thing that I've discovered and I've learned about this is that I have no idea actually what happens at all at the local level related to which students have access to which courses. So this is pretty important. And so I would really encourage you, if you're in a district, to have student focus groups at the high school so you can hear about what the students are actually experiencing in relationship to their high school experiences. Uh, and when we've done that with monitoring and we have focus groups with students, things actually change pretty quickly, which the kids then email me and say, oh, well, we had a conversation and now the assistant principal is changing the way in which counselors are focusing on challenges for us as students learning English. So I would really, really encourage you to really get out there and have the students. And, in all of our observations, next time I'll actually show you what the data look like. Every classroom we go into, we do the assessment capable learning and we ask, what are you learning today? Why are you learning it? And how will you know that you've learned it? And their responses we collate, and in the report we actually send it to the high school. And there have actually been policy changes based on what the students said at an aggregate level. We don't do it by subject. You can do it by subject, but then there's this other question, which is systemic change. So these are just suggestions from things that we've had that could be practices that are disseminated across districts that really support better understanding the experiences of students. Okay, so Jess, we're going to go to you.
Great, thanks, Christelle. So I see some familiar faces, but my name is Jessica Callan. I am the Family and Community Engagement Specialist here at USDE. And I did just want to share something that will be going out next week, but just an extra plug for an opportunity There was recently a Senate bill that was passed that requires USBE to create a pilot program that's a complementary approach to school improvement, drawing on community resources and engagements. I just have to share this up front. This is only available for middle schools. So this is specifically for middle level schools, but we want to share information about this program. We're partnering, like Christelle said, with West Ed and with the Utah Education Center for Policy, UE Policy Center, UEPC. And so we're working with them to identify middle schools to participate in this pilot, to have assistance, to have family and community engagement teams built up, and to better engage families and communities in their school. So this is really exciting. A lot of support being provided through this opportunity. I will send an email out next week to people who are interested and all middle level school principals about the opportunity, because we will be doing 2 webinars talking about what this looks like and how to be involved if you'd like to apply for that. So just wanted to give that plug. I'm going to put my email in the chat right now. So if you are interested in receiving this and you're at a middle school, shoot me an email and I'll forward you the information for the informational webinars next week.
Thanks, Jess. Do you have any questions for Jessica? Okay, so I'm going to put a plug in, not for this particular thing, but the way in which we've tracked data for multilingual learners. Students that actually become proficient in middle school and even if and actually make gains have a really difficult time when they transition to high schools, right? So this idea of transitioning from middle school to high school is really critical. Same thing with elementary schools. When students, actually in the 5th or 6th grade or whenever the transition happens and they go to middle school, their language proficiency ends up dropping for lots of reasons, right? We won't get into the complexity of that, but one of the ways that I've heard students talk about their actual experiences when I go to high schools and have focus groups is they talk about the support they actually receive from their families. And so this is the critical issue in relationship to students being motivated in relationship to how families are authentically engaged in the educational experiences of their students. And so this is a really great opportunity to look at the level of transition. All you'd have to do is run the data in your own district and see what actually happens when those transitions are either effective or not as effective as they could be, whether it's from elementary to middle or middle to high school. So this is a great opportunity. Thanks, Jess. I really appreciate that. And I know you probably have to run to another meeting or something, so thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so make sure you end up emailing Jess if you're interested in the middle school approach. And it's really great and of course it's really great to see Shelley. She's the director of special programs, Shelley Strahan. Her background is also from Ogden as well, so that's the other piece I want to make sure that you understand, is that she has a broad experience in relationship to education and diverse issues related to equitable access. So, Shelley, I'm going to hand it over to you, and we're going to I'm going to monitor the chat if you actually have a question. But if you have something to share, you just want to have a conversation, that's fine. Thanks, Shelley. And you can give a background of yourself as well and your school.
Hi, everybody. Can you guys hear me okay? All right. Cool. All right. So just to give a little bit of background, as Christelle said, I have worked at Utah Virtual Academy for 14 years. Prior to that, I taught at a middle school in Ogden School District. And when I was in Ogden School District, my background is actually special education. But when I taught in Ogden School District, probably, yes.
There's a little feedback, so can you move your mic a little bit farther away? Can you actually do?
Sorry, I didn't know how well it was working. This is the first time I've used this headset. Sorry about that, guys.
Well, that's okay.
Anyway, 80% of my kids were EL kids. So I taught language arts resource to students that were bilanguage learners. So that was kind of my first experience. And then of course at Utah Virtual Academy, I'm over all of our special programs. So we have been working on increasing the size of our EL program over the last 5 years. I think this year we have close to 100 students. Last year we actually had 130 because of COVID. That was the most we'd ever had. So, but we did drop down a little bit this year, although a lot of the students that showed up for COVID actually chose to stay with our school, which was really cool. So to go ahead and move into the presentation, let me go ahead and share that. Okay, and so most of my presentation is going to focus on the piece of working with students who are likely to be or might be both special education and, hang on, I gotta move my menu bar here. Both special education and EL, and how we make that determination. All right.
So one of the reasons I asked Shelley to present when I chatted with her is her experience in special education as well as English language development, and the way in which oftentimes students learning English end up being over-identified, right, as special ed, as if, not knowing English is somehow a disability. So this is a pretty critical issue.
Yep.
So I'm going to let her, but that's the reason. And the other thing is the way in which IEP teams are organized in district also, often leaves out the person that is most qualified to talk about language development is not on the IEP team. So that's the other issue.
Yes. Yep. And then conversely, on the other side of that, we've seen over the last 2 years a lot of students who are identified as EL when they're actually special ed. They don't even have a language. It's not a language barrier. Some of them don't even speak a separate language besides English. But because they have a parent that is either bilingual or only speaks a language other than English, and they have, say, like a reading disability, they sometimes get put into EL erroneously. So I'm going to kind of discuss both sides of that in terms of helping and working for our students. And so hence the name, Looking for Zebras, interdisciplinary teams that work for students. And I will have my contact information at the end of this presentation if anybody has questions or wants to reach out about anything that I talk about today. All right, so there is a phrase, they use it all the time on TV medical shows. I think I've heard it on at least 3 different ones. But this is the actual quote. I went and found the actual quote, and it says, "When you hear hoofbeats behind you, you don't expect to see a zebra." And it was Theodore Woodward, and he was a professor at the Maryland School of Medicine in 1940. Anyway, so he was the original progenitor of that quote. All right, except as those of us in education know, sometimes you find zebras. Okay, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about today is our zebras, our friends who are not like our other students and don't fit neatly into one category. All right, so our zebras that we're kind of going to talk about and utilize throughout this presentation, these are not real names. These are not real students. These are based on things that I have seen, both when I worked for Ogden and at Utah Virtual, that come up and have hit both special education and EL. So our first student is Miriam, and she is a kindergarten student whose teacher has reached out to you as the EL coordinator because she does not speak in class or interact with the other students unless the teacher intervenes and makes her. When her teacher tried to do the beginning of year cadence testing, Miriam sat and stared at the iPad and did not say anything. Okay. Our second student is Mario. Mario is a 4th grade student who is fluent in Spanish and loves chatting with his friends in both English and Spanish. In fact, he is so social and easily distracted, his teacher struggles keeping him on task. She reports that Mario's reading and writing are not at the same level as his classroom peers. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and hang on to those students throughout this presentation. We'll have some more discussion about the specific kids at the end, but we're utilizing these guys as examples of what I'm talking about throughout this presentation. Oh, sorry, that was correct. All right, and so our syllabus, we have basically 3 sections here. The first one is why an instant label isn't the answer. Second is what to do in the meantime. And third is what to do once we agree on a label. Okay, so as I am talking about this, think about this in terms of, I really wish I could make this presentation to our general ed teachers because I think they're the ones who really need it. I don't think that anything I'm going to talk about today is going to be news to you guys, just like it wouldn't be news to my special ed team if I presented to them. And so when I'm talking about some of this stuff, think about it in terms of you addressing this with the gen ed teacher when this situation comes up. Don't feel like I'm pushing information thinking you guys don't know it. I'm giving you talking points so when a gen ed teacher comes to you with one of these situations that you guys feel equipped to bring some of these things up and address it with the teacher because of the things that we've been seeing. And I know that in special ed there's a big push to work on this same thing. You know, why are we not either, why can't kids be both, or why are we putting them in the wrong one? Are they making them special ed when they're actually EL or vice versa? Okay, so our second topic is what to do in the meantime, and third is what to do once we agree on a label, because as we all know, once you put a student in EL services, once you put a student in special education services, we've labeled them. It's not necessarily a bad thing. They have to be in order to qualify for those services. So, all right. So first off, why an instant label isn't the answer, or why you need all the info before you make education altering decisions. Okay. All right, so with a general education, or when a general education teacher approaches you with concerns, you can usually assume, and I'm hoping this is kind of your bare minimum here. One is that the teacher will have superficial data. So this includes student classroom behavior, things that the teacher's seeing, student appearance, student name, maybe if there's a different language that the student speaks, like our example B Mario, that would be something that the general ed teacher would know. 2, the teacher will hopefully, and this one varies, we fought with teachers a lot when we first started our Child Find program 14 years ago, hopefully also have some academic data on the student. This includes test scores, writing samples, and assignments. 3, the teacher might, if you are lucky, have some background data. This includes family dynamics, previous education, languages spoken at home, and living situation. Number 3 is the number 1 most left off in Child Find, and this includes in special education. It drives me crazy when we get kids that are coming to our school from a previous school and nobody knows that nobody knew that the student was homeless. Nobody knew that the student, they didn't take into account that the student's been in 5 different schools in 4 years. And so this is a really important piece here. And a lot of your gen ed teachers, not all, but a lot of them probably won't have that information when they come to you. So the important thing here is if any of the 3 items above are missing, the first step is to collect that information. You cannot have Child Find without first collecting data, which you guys all know. But that third piece is really the big one here, because a lot of times that's going to be what tips us off to whether this is a student that's EL, special ed, or both. Okay, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, so the first step after data collection. So let's say you met with your general education teacher. You've got all that data. It might have involved you having to call the mom, the teacher having to call the mom, or the parents. We now know, you know, where the student lives, kind of their socioeconomic status, all of those things. Okay, so the first step after data collection is to forget that you know the student's name. And this piece is more for the general ed teachers than for you. You guys get this. In other words, what if our zebras had different names? Okay, so if let's say that our student A is now Oakley Jones. Okay, and I forgot to change her name on one of these, sorry guys. And our 4th grader is now Matt. Does that change how that general ed teacher views the student once we take out a last name that would suggest that maybe they are the child of immigrants or an immigrant themselves? Okay. Because in the first one, the temptation is to think, okay, she's not speaking in class, maybe she doesn't speak English. But if I give you Oakley Jones, who's not speaking in class, the first place my brain goes as a special educator is, oh, she's probably got a speech issue, or maybe we're dealing with selective mutism, okay? So we need to make sure that we think about it from both sides, because we haven't determined yet which is right or which is wrong. It could be either of those things. It could be both. She could be a non-English speaking student who's exhibiting selective mutism because she's anxious because she doesn't speak English. Okay, but just keep that in mind as you're working with the teachers. Make sure that your gen ed teachers aren't so focused on the student's background and where they're from and whether or not their parents speak English, that they're ignoring the possibility that language EL status might not be the issue at hand. Okay, so here's my flow chart for all child find. It's the same flow chart I use with my special education teachers. It is pretty much standard across the board for our special programs. The only thing I didn't include is 504, but we're gonna not talk about 504 for the purpose of today because that's its own separate thing. If you have questions about that at the end, please feel free to ask because I do that too. But so we have our child with data. Okay, we've collected the data. You've worked with our general ed teacher. You've collected the data. All right, so sorry. We now have general ed teacher involved, and you need to impress upon the general ed teacher that they are bound to this kid through this whole process. They don't get to just say, here, have a student. I don't know what's wrong with her, but please fix her. Okay, and I know that we've all dealt with that, even 14 years later, and having a pretty extensive child find program at my school for both EL and special education. I still deal with that sometimes where a teacher's just like wants to hand off the kid and make it not their problem anymore. Okay, so that's the first thing, is they have to be a part of this team through the whole process. And I'll talk about why in just a second. Your EL teacher or specialist, that's you or one of your teachers, okay, needs to be a part of this process because that's where this child find originated. All right, and then special education teacher needs to be brought in if there is any chance at all that the student might have something going on other than EL. Okay, and so this is what our team should look like. And you are always welcome, at least at my school, to reach out to someone in special education and say, hey, here's the deal with this kid. Would you look at this and tell me what you think? And they may come back and say, yeah, probably just an EL kid. And that's okay. We do that all the time. Actually, a lot of the times it gets forwarded to me because I do both, but it doesn't hurt to look. Asking is free. Doesn't mean we have to do full special education teaching, or sorry, full special education evaluation for the student just because you asked a special educator to take a look at your child find data. All right, and then the final component here, and I brought this up because it's not as, from a legal standpoint, this is not as binding in EL as it is in special education. In my opinion, it should be. At our school, we require parent permission for 504, which actually legally we're not required to get, which just blows my mind. EL and special education. And so parent permission for EL is a little bit different. You don't have a specific form necessarily that says, you know, so-and-so is allowed to screen my child. In special education, we do. We have a form the parent has to fill out that basically gives us permission to do whatever testing the team's agreed on the kid. And if you need to go there, your special education teacher can walk you guys through that process. But you do need to make the parent aware. And here's why. Okay, because your parent is an important part of this team, and they need to be an important part of this team. And you are going to have parents that refuse to be a part of the team, and that's something you have to deal with. But you should always try first. And so a special education teacher should always ask if there might be an EL component, and an EL teacher should always ask if there might be a special education component. Okay, so it's something you should think about with every student. 80% of our kids, you're going to rule one out or the other out immediately, but it's something we need to ask. All right, so what to do in the meantime? Okay, so you've assembled your team. You guys are working out what you're going to do for the student. Are we going to do special education testing? Are we just going to do the EL screener? Okay, and so in the meantime, and this is part of the reason why people, especially general ed teachers, really like to slap that label on right away, is because it means that now that kid's going to get services from you or from special ed. Okay, but that's not always necessarily the best thing for the student. And that oftentimes will lead to a mistake where maybe the kids should be both and they get pushed only into EL. Okay, and so we want to make sure that we are evaluating every option for these kids. And so this is what to do in the meantime. Okay, or how do you make sure the student doesn't fall further behind while your team figures out what the student really needs? Okay, so first of all, we're going to say we got parent permission. All right, parent says, yes, you can give my kid the EL screener. You guys met in the with the special ed teacher and got the official form signed so that you are now legal to go ahead and do testing on the student as the team decides is needed. Now what? Okay, so you need to make sure that you get your team in the same room and on the same page. Okay, so you can give an EL screener and do a special education evaluation at the same time. We do it all the time. Okay, especially for our littles. This is the most common in our elementary schools. You don't see it nearly as much in middle school and high school. Generally by then, unless the student is a recent immigrant, they've been identified both ways. Okay, but do make sure that you test the student in their primary language if the team decides on a special ed evaluation. And that might be something that you'll have to remind special education to do. It is in all of our paperwork that we are supposed to do everything in the student's native language and or the parent's native language if the parent requires a translator. However, it doesn't always happen that way. Okay, and so if you have a student, let's say you have a recent immigrant, and you know that the student doesn't speak Spanish, you've done the EL screener, or I mean, doesn't speak English, you've done the EL screener, we've determined this kid is definitely EL, but you also suspect maybe there's a learning disability. You need to make sure that that student is tested in Spanish or Portuguese or whatever their native language is. Okay, so things that don't require labels. Interventions. Your school should have some sort of an MTSS program. It varies from school to school. It might be a cooperative group in a grade where teachers take turns teaching it. It might be an interventionist, and this could include if the kid needs speech intervention prior to being determined eligible or not for special ed. And it might just be the regular ed teacher. At our school, our regular ed teachers do their own interventions. So they would pull out kids for tier 2, and then tier 3 is done either by an interventionist or the teacher, depending on the subject. And so you need to make sure that the students put into the appropriate MTSS interventions while this process is going on. Okay, 2, experts helping experts. The regular classroom teacher is a content expert. You are a language learning expert. The special education teacher is a curriculum modification expert. Help each other. Okay, this is the reason that we need all 3 of those people in the team. And regular classroom teachers often don't realize this, that they still have a role in this process because they're the ones who know the content and know what the student needs to learn where and when within the school year. And number 3, parents are experts too. There is a good chance that your student has a parent or guardian who knows them well outside of school to the extent that that person is willing to involve them. Okay, and I know that this is a big push, parent and community involvement in EL. It's a big push in special education too. And you want to involve the parents as much as you can. Okay, don't hesitate to get their opinions too. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to do what the parent asks. There's a difference, but it is important to involve them. All right. And 3, what to do once we agree on a label, or what are your options for helping the student now? Okay. So students don't come with a map, you must make one. All right, and you have a bunch of different things that kids may qualify for, that kids can receive. You have interventions, you have EL services, you have special education, all of which we've talked about. Okay, and just remember, you can mix and match. This is never an either or. Make sure that your team continues to work together. You don't want to overwhelm a student. Okay, if you get nothing else from my presentation today, this is probably the number 1 most important slide in this presentation. And this whole concept is mind-blowing for special education teachers. The first time it happened last year, we had a student that had extensive special ed services and extensive EL services. And the first time that this happened, a lot of our people in special ed minds were blown. Okay, a student with EL services might require fewer special education services than a student who doesn't require both. A student can be in math intervention and reading special education during the same school week. Okay, this blows general ed teachers' minds too. It's no, student special ed, he's your problem now. No, he's not. If the student doesn't qualify for special education in math, but he is still behind, or doesn't qualify for English language services, but is still struggling in English, the student qualifies for interventions. Okay, it doesn't matter if they're also receiving special programs elsewhere. In the areas they're not receiving special programs, they still qualify for those interventions. All right. And for our student last year, what ended up happening was our EL teacher and our special education teacher and our general education teacher met, and they determined they met during the IEP meeting. Sorry, I should clarify that. And they determined with the parent where this kid was going to go when, because there was no reason to double up on all of the same English services. And what our English language learner team was doing was, in some cases, very similar to what our special education team was doing with the writing and the reading. And so they wanted to make sure that they weren't overlapping so they could hit as much as possible with that kid during the week. Okay, it was really, really an incredible thing to watch. But it took a minute to get the general ed teacher on board, because it is mind-blowing to think that we can coordinate those special education and EL services. Okay, and so the key takeaway here is that the team needs to talk more than once a year. You may have some students where you need to be in contact with the special education and general education monthly. Okay, you need to make sure, as Christelle said, that you have someone from your English language learner services attending IEPs if you have an EL kid who is in special education. And don't be afraid to push back against the special ed department. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and say that. Some of our special educators, they talk a good game, they know all the laws, but you need to be a part of this. Okay, that is part of the law. We have our own set of laws that we have to abide by in terms of our English language services. And while they are not as extensive as IDEA, they definitely come into play here, and we need to make sure that the kid is getting everything that they need. Okay, so if the agreement is to split language services between special ed and EL, like we did with our kid last year, those services should be decided by the whole team. And it was actually written right into the kid's IEP, and this is totally okay, that the student was going to, that we had decided there's a section on the IEP where you can put things that the team considered or the teams decided. Okay, and we put on there that, you know, the students reading minutes were reduced, and here is why. And we put the information from our EL teacher in there, the information on the services the student was receiving from EL, so that if that student moved to a different school, which he did this year, he went back to his brick and mortar, that the team knows that he not only is he EL, but that we were coordinating those services for reading, so that the student wasn't getting the same thing twice in 1 week. Because we don't want to pull them out of gen ed any more than we have to. Okay, all right. So now let's go ahead and look at our zebras. All right, I tried to pull names out, although apparently I forgot Miriam's there. Okay, so our kindergartner here. Okay, does anybody have any ideas? What would you do in this situation if this was a student that was referred to you? Anybody want to chime in here?
I would ask if they've talked with the parents first.
Okay.
Because just, you know, and really do an intake there as far as, has this been the experience? Has this been since birth? Is it just a new thing? Has there been trauma recently in the life, her, you know, in her life? Or I really think that's a place to kind of get a perspective, because school could be really overwhelming. It also, I think, as you talk with parents, they can help you understand the languages spoken in the home. Or, you know, we do encounter a lot of our ESL parents who are afraid to continue their own language when they move here, and they create an absence of language just because of that fear. And so they don't talk in any language as the kids are little. And I've experienced that a couple of times.
Perfect. All right. Yes. And I love that you brought that up, because especially with our little kids, if they have parents that are new to this country or new to the English language, that can be a huge concern there. And yes, I agree. That's a great starting place for this kid. Anybody else?
Hi, Shelly. This is Melinda and Cash. Let me see if I'll turn on my camera too, so you're not just talking black square. Can you see us okay? My thought on this kindergarten student was just that you need to give her some time also and some more observation and most importantly, some intervention. You can't just assume that something's wrong when she's just new to school. Obviously, you would see what the home language survey said and get information from that and determine if she needs to be screened based on the home language survey, but then also looking at interventions. And if you're not sure what to try, taking that to your school SAT team where they might help you problem solve and do some interventions to see if that might be effective in helping the student get the help she needs. But I wouldn't assume disability right away for a new student in kindergarten.
Awesome. Yes, and I agree with you. And yeah, and that's one of the things we run into is if you were to jump the gun and immediately test this kid, if it is a language issue, there's a pretty good chance that she's probably not going to do very well even on a nonverbal test like the Tony. And if it is a special education issue, there's a pretty good chance she would fail an EL screener. We see that a lot because if a kid can't read, they can't, and they won't speak because of maybe a speech disability, or they won't pass a screener. And so that's kind of one of the things we run into. Anybody else have any ideas about our friend here?
I would want to observe her in other settings. So how is she interacting with peers on the playground or in the lunchroom, or, and again, that parent component of is she talking at home? I was that kindergartner. I didn't say anything in my whole first year of kindergarten, but I am an English speaker and only English speaker. So I would want a lot more information.
Yep, and I agree. I love that. I think it is important to observe these kids in different and varied environments and to look at the different things that this kid's doing. I mean, is she maybe doing things in art that would lead you to a solution, you know, maybe what she's drawing or how she's interacting in that setting versus when the class is trying to do reading. Okay, excellent.
I
All
have
right,
something I'd like
and
to
then
add.
our friend, oh, go ahead. Yes.
My name is Michelle Tanner. My role is the superintendent of the deaf at the Utah Schools for the Deaf and the Blind. So I always, and it's always a hard thing for me, but that sometimes some of my students have been held up because they maybe ELL, they come from a home that speaks Spanish, but obviously I think everybody can kind of guess hearing loss would trump that, right? I mean, because it doesn't matter if they're speaking English, Spanish, Japanese, it doesn't matter. So whenever I get this, obviously my lens is distorted to my perspective. So always, I hope that people are always asking that question too. Before you go too far, please also be assessing their hearing loss, because it's very possible, it doesn't matter what language they choose, it's very possible the child may have a hearing loss, and that would reflect in your classrooms very similar to an ELL student. So that's just something I wanted to put out there, because that'd be the first thing. They're not speaking. I'm going, they're not speaking. That's an oddity in general, whatever language that they're in. They should be saying something or attempting something. But if you have a hearing loss, they're not hearing it. So, or they're hearing it muffled, or, you know, whatever. There's lots of different types of hearing losses. But anyway, I just want to put that out there in everybody's thoughts. As you start looking at these things, please don't go too far down the pathway and then find out, oh, they had a hearing loss, you know. So
Yes.
yeah, thank you.
Yes, I appreciate that. I'm actually glad that you brought that up, because one of the things that is a requirement, I know that all schools do, they're supposed to do a hearing and vision screening as part of kindergarten. But if we have this kid coming in, and this is early September, okay, which is usually around the time that we're doing Acadience testing, at least at my school. we may not have screened this kid yet. Kindergarten screening may not be until, I'm trying to think, I think in Ogden School District, we used to do it in early October, but obviously that's probably changed in 15 years. But a lot of that depends too on which school you're at, because they usually have a team that goes around and does it. And that team might not hit your school until October. It might hit the school, 5 miles away in the end of September because they're first on the list. And so don't hesitate to reach out and request this testing if you think it is an issue, either vision or hearing testing. You absolutely can do that. And we do it all the time in special education because in order to evaluate a student, especially our littles, our friends that are K through 6, we have to have the hearing and the vision screening. And we've actually provided our psychologists, our people and our counselors that do our testing, our cognitive and academic testing with machines, so they actually can do the hearing and vision testing for us. They actually have been trained to do that. So we just do the basic beat test, which would be sufficient in this case, I think, to suggest whether or not she needed further hearing testing. But don't hesitate to ask for that before your official screener time.
Yeah, and I was just to let you know, the School for the Deaf will often lend out screeners. If you need them and you don't have them, contact us, and as long as you have a staff member that's a speech language pathologist or nurse or someone, we can train them real quick and you can use it and then return our equipment.
Thanks, Michelle.
That is fantastic and good to know.
Yeah, maybe when I send out an email to everybody, Michelle, we can actually put your contact, or you can put your contact information to me, and then I would send it out to everybody. So that's a great example. And also, Christy Wagner is talking about actually some of the best work I've ever seen done in teaming across grade level based on a really clear protocol not to actually make these mistakes related to assumptions. Actually comes from a Weber School District. And so she's adding this whole thing about doing classroom instructions and tasks related to observations. And so one of the things that they start out with is all the observations based on interactions of the child with peers, on the playground, with other teachers. And so, and Tiana, I just want to thank you for being courageous enough to talk about your own experience, because I know that ends up being a challenge. So thank you for doing that. And Michelle and everybody else who's spoken, Melinda from Cash, these are really critical issues. And the whole thing about collaboration related to cross grade level that Weber does, I think, is really important, because then you can actually see a pattern or a history related to descriptions of interactions in different contexts, and then how families have been engaged, and the things that you need to actually be sensitive to in relationship to the context of the family. So thanks, everybody. So Shelley, continue.
Oh, yes, thank you. And yes, thank you, everybody. My kids actually attend in Weber School District, so I'm kind of biased, but I think Weber School District is fabulous. So I do appreciate that. And you're absolutely right. That observation piece is critical. And like I said, don't hesitate to reach out if for some reason you don't have the staff, or you don't have the ability necessarily to track this kid or the general ed teacher to involve special education, because if nothing else, a lot of times your special ed group will have your observation forms with the pertinent questions for behavior and things like that. And hopefully, I know at our school we're always willing to share that stuff. Hopefully that's true in your schools and districts as well. All right, so let's go ahead and look at student B. He's a little bit different situation. Honestly, I think student B is a much more common situation that you're likely to see in an elementary school versus O was kind of our one-off. So he's a 4th grader. We know he's fluent in Spanish, and he talks with his friends in both English and Spanish. But he's also social and easily distracted, hard to keep on task, and his reading and writing are not at the same level as his classroom peers. We're going to assume this kid's not EL or special ed yet. So what are our thoughts on what would you guys do for this student if one of your general ed teachers brought you this kid?
I would give her the suggestion of how implementing more activities that include listening and speaking in the classroom, because it seems like if he's getting distracted, probably others are as well. So there needs to be more opportunities for them to communicate with each other, so that way they've practiced that skill, which is good for everyone, and it gets all the talking out so that she's actually able to do the task at hand that she wanted to complete. And building speaking skills always helps to support reading and writing.
I agree. And a lot of times, especially if we're not in a school like the school I was in Ogden, where everybody participated in EL, because I think it was something like 68% of the students my last year there, 6th through 8th grade, were actually EL students. If you're not in a school like that where everybody's part of that game, it is very possible that your gen ed teacher isn't thinking about this, and it is probably something you're going to have to reach out to them on, because again, you guys are our experts in language learning and all of the components that come with that. So excellent answer. Thank you. All right. Anybody else?
I always start with a parent interview. Talk to parents. I think they're the key. They're the key in all this. They know their kids the best, and I want to know what information they have to guide whatever my next steps are. I wouldn't do anything probably until I talk to parents.
I totally agree. Yeah, especially with this kid, because I'd be curious to see if they're seeing the social and distraction issues at home too, if they struggle with getting him to follow through with tasks and things like that. Excellent, excellent. All right, anybody else?
Yes, can I ask a question about that? This is Amy Campbell, and I'm at Park City School District. Hi, Castell. I used to be in Ogden as well. And I used to be, before that, I was in Arizona. And in Arizona, it's a very different EL system. They used to do when I was there.
Yes.
Sorry, I just ran up the stairs so I could be a part of the conversation because I was listening. And I have COVID, so I can't breathe. Just a minute. Okay. So they used to put kids in a 4-hour immersion type experience for whole language acquisition. That's changed now, but that's where I was teaching and that's how it happened. And so that part about asking the teachers for them to reconnect with the parent, I just have kind of a curious question. Like, is that, in Arizona, that was standard practice, and in Ogden, I felt like it was standard practice. I'm struggling with it right now. So I think that's just best practice for a teacher to contact the parents to build that relationship and partnership. Is anyone else having like issue with that or pushback? Because I think it leads to that dumping problem that we were talking about earlier, where they say, I'm going to give it to the EL teacher, I'm going to give it to the special ed teacher, and then they can take it. So that I'm just wondering about that protocol for like the parent connection and partnership. Can you help me with that? Anybody?
And Amy, I would echo that, because I think one of the slides that were shown earlier on is how would you handle that with any other kid in your classroom? And I bristle a lot at the idea that because they speak another language, that somehow this is a different approach than they would with any other kid. So everything that both of you have just said about that, contacting the parent, or what strategies are you using for your classroom management, and then back to what Harmony talked about, which is that engagement of the students. Are they getting opportunities to talk and interact with each other? All become super important. But I would exactly start with that slide that said, what are you doing with all your other kids?
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Yep. Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. It blows my mind. And again, you have to remember, I come from a special education background, and it is the law that parents will be involved. Like, there is no, like, it doesn't matter whether the teacher wants to speak to the parent. I mean, because some of our parents are not very pleasant to speak to, I'll be honest. But or whether you have to use a translator, which is always makes conversation much more difficult, but it doesn't matter. It's part of the law. And so it blows my mind when I run into these teachers who just don't interact with parents, don't involve parents, just because that was the way I trained, but it's specific to my particular area of expertise. I do find, and I'd be curious to see if anybody else has this, that yes.
So I just want to say that this is a civil rights obligation, just blanket. You cannot have any meetings and you cannot not engage families in a language that they don't understand, that's not meaningful for them. So it's not
Agreed.
just about special ed
Agreed.
legislation, it's about civil rights obligations. And if you want to be under OCR, all you have to do is not do that. And I'm pretty sure you don't
Correct.
yep. And go to the Department of Justice and have a huge lawsuit on your hands because you're not following civil rights law. This is civil rights law. This is not a choice.
Yep. Yep. And it is built into every form that we use in special education. You are absolutely right, Christelle. And same thing with 504, because 504 also follows under OCR. But we do have a lot of pushback, and it's been my experience that this happens a lot in schools where we have so in schools that have a more of a socioeconomic, so lower socioeconomic students, so whole school Title I schools. There we go. That's the word I was after. Okay, so schools where more than 35 or 40% of the school is free and reduced lunch. Schools where we have a lot of students that are EL, or districts where we have, so like Ogden District, Salt Lake District. This component is just built in, as our speaker mentioned earlier when she worked in Arizona. It's just built in. I mean, it's just part of what they do. The places that I see this being an issue a lot of times, and I'm seeing it as teachers come into our school from these schools to work for us, is schools where we have a more homogenous student body. That's a nice way of saying it. So we don't have a lot of EL kids. We don't have a lot of kids from different socioeconomic backgrounds. We have fewer kids that are free and reduced lunch population. That teachers, and part of this, to be fair to teachers, is that a lot of times those families will reach out to the teacher first. Those are the parents that want to volunteer in the classroom. They show up, for the parent-teacher organization, and so that may be a small part of it. But yeah, I have noticed that it's a gap in a lot of our schools, and it's sad that this is still an issue that we're still having to tell schools that they need to include parents. Anyway, all right. Anything else on our fourth grader that anybody wants to bring up? Okay, all right, then, sorry, I gotta click on it. All right, so did anybody have any other questions that they wanted to bring up regarding this, or any further discussion that they wanted to have regarding our students who are our unidentified students that we're working with in our child find?
So we actually have a really good question, and I think there are lots of people on our meeting who can respond to this. It says, what are districts using for interpreting? Now, the reason this is incredibly important is that we've had some huge shifts in the way in which programs are evaluated related to interpretation services. And so I know Robin and their district has done a lot of stuff. We actually had a previous session from Ogden where their person actually used data related to the way in which they use interpretation services. So let's hear from a few people about interpretation services.
So I need to fully credit Ogden, because it was the Ogden presentation that gave us the insight to how we might use Proprio. So I'm going to defer, because we're copying their example, and very grateful.
So Rhonda, are you willing to talk about this? Rhonda Bickmore is actually from Ogden.
Yes, I was waiting to see if Thais would step up, because she's much better at communicating than I am. I stutter a lot. Our Proprio services, one of the things we did was we did a huge RFP. We piloted first some services, and then we were just told yesterday, actually in a meeting, that we are going to again have those services for another 4 years. What we found with I'll talk about Proprio, but if you could just kind of think of any service that you choose, does that make sense? That we found that Proprio was very easy to learn. So any individual educator could easily learn how to use it. It only took 1 or 2 times of using it, but then that was pretty easy to do. We found a way to distribute funds for each school to use Proprio. We also had one person in the district translator, who was in charge of Proprio. There was a person to go to ask questions about it. We distributed materials. We also have tried to integrate the use of Proprio in several different aspects of our district's counseling department. We have it in our community and family ESL endorsement class. We introduce Proprio and have them go through it, etc. So I guess those are the kind of the things we've used with the service. We also liked the array of services that we get from Proprio. We not only get a person online who can speak right to a parent, within I think 30 seconds for most languages, and maybe a minute and a half for some of the other languages that aren't so used that Proprio has. Might have to wait a little bit, but they also translate paper materials. And so that was the other thing, was that we didn't want to have to use several different services. We wanted one service together. So if you have any, I don't know if I covered what you'd like, but if there's any other questions.
I'll tack on to that, Rhonda, a couple things. Sorry, I didn't know you were waiting for me to step up. I think Rhonda's more eloquent than me. But anyway, one thing that I would point out is that we went through a really strict RFP process. And I was on that, and I know we did get to a point, we had so many people that wanted to be our service. There was a company that had some features that were slightly cheaper, but we had to factor in the overall cost of our school district's need. So they have different costs when you do the different services, whether you're doing written or whether you're doing spoken. And then sometimes they have different costs depending on the languages that you're looking for. So since we have over 15 languages, I think at this time, maybe 25, 15 to 25, I think is where we're at. I'd have to go look. But most of them are Spanish speakers. And so we do have an in-house translator. So for us, all of our written Spanish translation is done by her. So when we were doing our RFP, we took that factor out and we only analyzed the cost factor with that included. So I just wanted to mention that if you don't have a district in-house person who's offsetting the cost, then I wouldn't just automatically go straight to Proprio. I would definitely kind of look, because there were a couple that if you needed both services, your overall cost might end up being cheaper. And one of the things that we did, or I should say Claudia did, because she's the one that led all this, is that we did pilot this for a little while. And as we piloted it, we kept really good data of how many calls we were making, how many minutes, what that was doing, so that when we did do our RFP, we were able to drop that data into the cost and kind of say, okay, well, this is what we know we've done. So if we use this service, what would that have cost us? And that was a really nice comparison we were able to do that really helped us make the best choice of which service to use. So I just wanted to bring that up, because I know that doesn't look the same in every district. And the other thing that I would bring up, especially with the SPED conversation, I was recently talking to a SPED team, and they were telling me kind of just their personal experience, and they really loved the ease of using Proprio. They loved the legal, ethical, direct translation of it, which really allows you to have that personal connection with the family versus it being built with someone else who has a tendency to summarize more. So in essence, they're having all the conversation, right? And they're getting that. The one challenge that has been presented that I would recommend people think about as you move forward is that the more people you have in a meeting with that service, a little bit more confusing it becomes. So best practices, one of the things we're really trying to start pushing out now is really giving our schools and our people tips for how to use the service effectively. So kind of setting up the meeting and saying to parents and the teachers that are in the meeting and the SPED department, and whoever's there, to say, okay, we can only speak in a few sentences at a time because this person's truly going to translate what we say word for word. And it's kind of like a practicing and kind of getting used to, like, how do I interrupt someone and stop them so the translator can do that? How do I make sure people introduce that they're speaking if there's a lot of people in the room? So it's a really exciting place to be, that we don't have to worry about the logistics of having a translator. Now we just work on how do we leverage that effectively to build relationships and really get all parties on the same page. So, but it is something I think worth reflecting on. And then I do want to tell you, I'm really excited to tell you that the last few years, Rhonda and her predecessor have worked really hard in Ogden on our special ed processes. We have some really good protocols now with collaboration and integration with our SPED department. We just even re-looked at it this summer and refined it and are constantly improving it. And it's really been fun to see his presentation and also reflect on where we can refine that. But I really appreciate those kind of points. And it's really exciting to say, hey, we're on the right track now, right? We're doing all these good things that have been presented. So thanks, Shelley, for doing that.
Yes,
Absolutely. And thank you
Ty.
for going over that. Yes.
So I'm going to ask, well, Robin was great because she got the idea, and that's why these meetings are so important, because of what's been shared. So so now that Ogden has kind of said, like, they're the pioneers in relationship to what's been happening. Robin, you want to say how you've used that to really support the work that you're doing?
And really, it's been in the same manner. In fact, it's been really nice. We had refugee families move in and competed all over the state, at least within the Salt Lake County area, to have Dari translators. And the one person that we had who was helpful with our language actually quit on us. And so to be able to use Proprio to provide those services, and one of our celebrations is just a story. We have neighborhoods that have really taken our families under their wing and want to help in many ways. And there's been some frustration just the language barrier. And so we did have one of the moms who was most active reached out to Chris Westerfield, who's on this meeting. And Chris came up with the idea of actually having this mom download the Proprio app onto her phone. And so we're allowing a parent who is delivering diapers and supplies and helping the parents by driving them around. She now actually has access to that as well, to talk with the family. We've actually, one of the kids has been struggling in school. And so just to be able to have that on demand immediately to call and to have full translation has been invaluable. We have with remote learning, with a lot of other things, have really needed to have translation more available in many, many languages, and at times have not had enough Spanish speaking translators to really fill the needs that we have out there. We did use Proprio, their writing service, and we found it to be quite expensive. So I would tell you that if you're wanting to use that for your other languages, just know that is quite the cost. However, with that being said, it was very professional and it was very quickly turned around. So when we did that, we've decided that we will outsource for those things like a calendar that aren't coming out until next August. We will figure out how to do that with our current or previous services. But for remote learning, for emergencies, for a snow day, we were very happy and pleased with that turnaround time. We still feel like we have a lot of work to go on encouraging all of our staff and our faculty to really use that at the level that they could. That example of the student who was being a challenge in class would be a prime example of just reinforcing and re-educating over and over again of our teachers that there's no reason now to not reach out to the parents and have a valuable conversation. And that's not been available before. So we really feel like we're in the infancy of just starting to use it and starting to figure it out. We do have conferences coming up in about 4 weeks that will, we're not providing in-person translators. We're actually just pushing the issue to use Proprio. And one thing that we are really interested in is that we have a couple of parents who do need to have sign language, and we are going to do a beta test with their parents to see if they actually like it and it works for them, so that we're not having to experiment, if you will, at a time when it might be an IEP or high stakes or parent conferences. So that's a commitment that my team has made to get some feedback from our parents on whether or not they like it.
Thanks, Robin. Jenny
Excellent.
Cross from Bucks Elder says they use Marti, so all caps MARTTI for oral interpretation. So so I just want you to know that one of the legislations that have been focusing actually on evaluating interpretation services, and this is work that's been done with Olivia Whiteley, who is the policy analyst for the IRC, and so we're with with Senator support. So that's one actual policy that will help us get a better idea of evaluating the effectiveness of the range of translation services, because vendors are obviously are willing to sell you whatever they actually have already. So the fact that we're moving toward more of evaluation of interpretation services, I think, will be valuable. Thais says we've had to work on changing mindsets too. It has helped us to just sit in a room with a group of people and tell them to just log on as a practice. And once they do it once, it really helps. And then Michelle Tanner is saying the companies that provide ASL interpreters are 5-Star Interpreting, ASL Communications, and Interwest Interpreting. And you can find their information online. So I'll make sure that I send these things out if anybody wants to send me these services, because, and then Robin is saying Proprio also has ASL. I'm also going to send you the link to when Ogden did the presentation based on the data they use for cost-benefit analysis, which I think is a really important argument when you're using it with board members, right? If you say this is a cost-benefit analysis that has already been done and this is the method that was used, then it's more likely that people who aren't that familiar with it would better understand. So Rhonda is saying, Krista, could you speak to OCR and student interpreters? Okay, so you shouldn't be having student interpreters. Okay, that's just really clear. Besides the fact that you have to have, like IDEA, least segregated environment, so you can't have counselors programming students who are, quote unquote, whatever your definition of newcomer is, which ends up being seriously problematic, are not really understanding how language acquisition works with diverse students at different levels, and you keep programming students into the lowest level of ESL classes. Okay, that's a huge OCR violation. And then Shelley is saying, Shelley, do you want to just get back on and say what you're saying about interpretation?
Oh yeah, I just was adding in there that UTVA, we use Interwest Interpreting for our sign language, our ASL, and then we use certified, I believe it's Certified Language International. We know them as, sorry, I spelled international wrong, that's sad. We know them as CLI. And they're very, very similar to what you're talking about with Proprio. We use them for the spoken language, and we can call and get an interpreter, and again, 30 seconds to a minute and a half, depending on the language. And we use them for spoken and written interpretation. Their written interpretation has a 2 to 3 day turnaround time. But we've been working on translating all of our parent engagement documents, all of our beginning of school documents, important things like that. So yeah, that was.
Okay, Okay, so then Robin is putting, we use Latinos in Action students to help parents with registration. We do not use them otherwise. So I think this is a really, really important example in relationship to the methods of registration that end up determining the future of a student without really informing parents of a course of study that will help them with post-secondary success. The other thing that I think is important is when you're actually using Latinos in Action or student translators, the way in which you use them creates for families and communities that students, our own students, have assets. We don't have to go to Spain and get someone who speaks, European, Spanish, Castilian, or whatever. And then someone else is saying we're small, rural, so there's carbon. Our ESL aides provide our interpretation and translation services as part of their regular activities. Only one of our 97 ELs is not Spanish speaking. Our aides are all bilingual Spanish. It is a great help to build relationships with families. So the reason this is really critical, it goes back to this idea of how the biliteracy seal can be competency based and a leverage to support the economic development of families and communities who speak a language other than English. And Michelle Tanner says, we have hired staff members for the Spanish translation since that is more common translation they need. I think this is really important. There are some people who actually, believe it or not, they actually ask me, that they have to pay more for, I'm not going to say that it's a district. It's not a district. It's another group in USBE who aren't clear about the relationship between the Spanish spoken by our own students and then Spanish spoken as from Spain. So there actually is a serious problem because then people end up saying, well, what is the dialect in Spanish that our students speak? Okay, so it's not a dialect. It's as if here's the European Spanish and then everybody else is speaking is a dialect. So that's part of the problem. Anya from Alpine is saying we use InSync for interpretation and translation, talking points for two-way communication in our families through texting. So these are all really important examples, and I just want to thank Lori for asking this question. Thais is saying, I'm confused if it is not legal to use. How do we use that as a competency component for the biliteracy seal? Okay, so we're going to talk about the biliteracy seal after we do this section, because remember, there's two different things in relationship to the way in which you use students academically and the way in which you create environments for students to actually attain a biliteracy seal, whether it's the USBE pathway or whether it's a local LEA, ensuring that the biliteracy seal can be used from an LEA perspective. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. So any other comments for Shelley, or Shelley, do you want to?
Yes, I have one more comment regarding this because you were just talking about the Spanish from Spain instead of versus your. So be careful when you're using staff members to translate, simply because you want to make sure that your staff members are familiar with the academic language. And I bring this up, I actually graduated with a degree in English. I got my special education endorsement later. I was an English teacher for like a year, and then I went into special ed because I liked those kids better anyway. But in order to graduate with my degree in English and humanities from Southern Utah University, I had to have so many years of foreign language. Well, my Spanish 2 class ended up being taught by a teacher who wasn't the original professor. The original professor had a wife who had some kind of immune disease, and they ended up having to leave and go back to their home state at the beginning of the semester. And so they pulled the only person they had that was qualified as both a teacher and Spanish speaker to teach that class. And he was actually from the seminary so he was a seminary teacher at SUU, and he came in, he went on his mission to Costa Rica. And so he was pretty fluent in Spanish. but he didn't know the academic language. Like he didn't, it used to drive me absolutely crazy because I'd already had 3 years of Spanish in high school. And then this was my second Spanish class in college. And there were other kids like that in there with me. And when somebody one day asked him the difference between hermosa, linda, lindo, and bonito, and he honestly couldn't tell us, like he had no idea in terms of the academic language. I wouldn't necessarily want him translating something serious like during an IEP meeting for a parent, even though he was a fluent speaker, because he didn't understand the academic language. He understood the colloquial language that he was speaking on the streets as he was talking to people about whatever he was talking to them about as a missionary. And he spoke with a lot of slang and was sometimes difficult even for us to understand. And learning Spanish in Costa Rica, it wasn't like he had a different accent. It was literally just the language he was using. So I would caution you to be careful if you're using staff as translators, to make sure that you are using staff that know academic language, and not necessarily, or are native speakers and know all of the language, versus somebody that maybe learned Spanish on a mission. Anyway, yes, I agree. I mean, thank you. Yeah, for especially if you're hiring them as a translator. But I know at some of our small schools, especially charter schools, we just, we have that one teacher that speaks Spanish. And so when we have to talk to one of our 3 parents who need that Spanish translation, we just have that person do it. And that's fine. Just make sure that they understand the academic Spanish, and that we don't have somebody who speaks street Spanish trying to translate an IEP meeting, because it can get really awkward and it can be very difficult. Anyway, thank you.
Can I make another comment?
Yeah.
Something that we've found, so we use Marti, that's it's a over the phone translator. And sometimes we think that, oh, we have a translation service, and so now we're just going to send that out to all of our educators and our problem is solved. But really the importance of training teachers on how to use interpreters and translation services, where a lot of times you've seen it, I've seen it all over multiple districts. Teachers will talk and talk and talk, and then they expect the interpreter to summarize the main points. But when you're using Marti or you're using any of these translators, really teaching teachers what it looks like to translate or interpret with word-to-word translation. Or if they're using one that is computer generated, like talking points or anything like that, what type of language are they using? And is it going to be clearly translated? Otherwise, I feel like there's a lot of room for frustration. A lot of teachers say, well, it was too hard. The interpreter didn't understand, and it was a frustrating experience, but it's because the teachers haven't been trained on what direct translation looks like, which is so much more effective. But if you don't know how to use it, then you're not going to have the buy-in that is needed to really provide real communication with parents.
Yeah, so Michelle Tanner says she agrees with Shelley, what she's saying in relationship to the use of academic language. And then Emmy's also saying that that goes along with students who are aides, so paraprofessionals, when they're translating. So this goes back to the biggest issue in relationship to how academic language is used in whatever context. Because even when people are trained for translation services, they're actually trained to understand the legal, right? The legal language or the medical language. Well, there's also educational language that is specific, especially when you're having meetings, that if the person who's translating doesn't really understand how that's used or the context, it ends up being problematic. So Shelley, I'm going to give you the last word because I know you probably have to go as well.
Oh yeah. That was pretty much it for me. Here's the last slide. It's got my contact info. You guys are welcome to email me with any questions, concerns. If you want to know more about CLI, the service that we use, I'm happy to share that information. It sounds very similar to Marti and Propio. in terms of what it's providing for us. And I'll agree with those of you that said that the document translation is expensive. It is, and we have utilized staff members who do speak academic Spanish, such as our Spanish teacher who went to school to do that and also went on a Spanish speaking mission. So she speaks both. She knows both the colloquial and the academic language there, but to sometimes translate things on websites. I mean, if we have a couple of phrases on a website that need translated, I have her do it. I'm not going to pay, $200 to have that, to put that on a Word document and then have it translated and then have to put it back on. But for our big documents, our student handbook, things like that, we've paid for, and they are pricey, but they're worth it. And I've got that student handbook translated into Spanish forever, and we'll never need it again. So anyway, any other final questions for me before I turn the time back over to Christelle?
Well, I think there actually is a question from Robin. She's saying, I'd love to have training on the way in which, is there someone who is confident in training teachers on this? So it seems like Jenny Cross has actually identified what the issue is related to what happens when teachers get frustrated about using translation services. So maybe, and Thais just put in the chat, working with interpreter from Proprio. So I think this is like an ongoing conversation. And I'm going to open up, when I send out the link to this, and then the link to Ogden's presentation, we can also have a forum in which you can ask each other in relationship to the key components for helping teachers better actually use interpretation services. So, Shelley, you've been fabulous. Thank you so much. I had a great time chatting with you.
Thank you.
And everyone is saying, from the bottom of their heart, thank you. You're doing great work. Keep it up. We appreciate the work that you do. Thanks.
Thank you. And Christelle, I will send you my PowerPoint. You are welcome to send that out to people, and everybody, you are welcome to use my PowerPoint for whatever. I mean, if you want to use it as a talking point with gen ed teachers, anything like that, feel free. It's open source. So and like I said, if you have any questions, my email's on there. Don't hesitate to reach out. Ask me how we're doing something specific. Ask me for an opinion on something. I'm happy to share in any way that I can.
So thanks, Shelley. And I want to thank each of you who contributed your conversations and your questions. And I realize we've been sitting for a long time, but I'm just going to, our tendency is always to plow through things because we have lots of other work to do. So I'm just going to open up the conversation to the first one, not the biliteracy seal yet. We'll just have a brief conversation about that. But the biggest thing is that I sent out to you a survey because USBE, based on a legislation House bill, or might be a Senate bill, I'm not sure, is moving toward competency based. And their attempt at USB has been to do the high school portrait of a high school graduate, and now personalized competency based education and what that could look like. So now they're trying to really use that in relation to changing the entire accountability system. So that survey link is really critical. You have to send it out to all your teachers because I took it. And so the more comments we get on that survey, and when the USBE leadership is actually looking at what we're saying from the field, we'll have a bigger opportunity to influence what will be happening with competency-based education that's personalized, for all of our students. So I'm just going to say the way in which the ESL endorsement, and people have already started asking me this, and I'll probably do a separate section for it. There are already districts and LEAs who have done competency-based ESL endorsements. Now, the reason this is important is once we did a survey in relationship to teachers who had the ESL endorsement from universities. Now, there's nothing against universities, so just please understand that. But what ended up happening, it was more theoretical and not very practical, embedded in the actual classroom experiences. right? So the translation into actual practice with people who had previously taken an ESL endorsement wasn't really making a difference in relationship to how they were changing and adapting their instruction to a wide range of students learning English. So then we did a pilot program. I think it was about 5 years ago when I actually taught a competency-based ESL endorsement course at the U, and it was a pilot because it was an experiment, and there were people from all over the state who took the course, but many dropped out because they were used to having a professor tell them what to read and what to do. And in competency-based, it's really specifically related to, this is the way it was organized. I actually used the rubrics, and the teachers in the course selected the evidence they were going to use to assess themselves on all of the elements in the TESOL domains so they could determine what they needed most to have an impact on their classroom. And so they actually picked a way that they would use evidence to support their movement on the mastery rubric, which is still in existence in most of the courses that are USBE's online course. So the reason I'm saying this is that after this, Monticello Academy, they ended up for the last 4 years using all those resources as well as the protocols, and they ended up having the first competency-based ESL endorsement in the state. And then Provo did a similar thing. Wasatch has just done theirs where they use instructional coaches. Tooele is doing that. And so here ends up being the issue. The issue in actual legislation is how does an endorsement, and if you look at all the new endorsements, how do the endorsements provide separate pathways for teachers to become more competent? So that doesn't mean that if you actually have a program that has been approved previously, like Davis School District, that you can't keep doing that. The question is this: how are you integrating the way in which actual practices in the classroom are informed by the ESL endorsement program that you have designed? That's really the point. So, and if you notice in the ESL endorsement that I sent out to you, it actually has the competencies based on the TESOL candidate requirements for teacher education and universities being approved for an ESL endorsement, so that the way in which you design your program for your students doesn't necessarily have to be contracting with a university and taking their syllabi. And the reason I'm saying this is a pretty simple one. 5 years ago, when I became the person in charge of Title III, I actually did an audit on all the syllabi for universities. And I actually found that most of the research they were using, the theoretical constructs, were pretty much out of date. They weren't current at all. Recently, I asked colleagues who do the work and are excellent teachers to review a language acquisition university course. And they actually, and I didn't say anything other than please review this and identify the issues where this course does not really support what's happening in the classroom. And one of the things they said is this course on language acquisition has nothing to do with WIDA assessments or teaching academic language in the content areas. And this was just about 2 months ago when this happened. So the point is, this is an opportunity for you to take your instructional coaches and really do focus groups related to teachers who already have ESL endorsements through a contracted university and see how it is you can upscale and embed the work that you're actually doing in classrooms. Because instructional coaches who are ESL endorsed will probably tell you and have very, very clear ideas about what instructional coaching actually supports the way in which teachers work with students at multiple levels learning English. Pulling teachers out and pulling students out away from Tier 1 instruction is a serious problem, which means that regular ed teachers need to better understand how language acquisition functions, separate from so-called literacy coaches, who also generally have no idea the relationship between literacy and language acquisition and how they need to be aligned with each other. So I'm just going to open this up about what you've noticed, what you've seen with teachers who already have an ESL endorsement, or the things that you need, or innovative practices that you've already done related to embedding, really specific professional learning in what teachers are doing. So I'm just going to give you time to think about it, and because this is an opportunity now, right? So this is a strategic opportunity to align your resources related to the way in which instructional coaches or ESL coordinators, or whatever you call them, how they work collaboratively together so that all your teachers can be ESL endorsed through competency-based programs based on your resources. So anyone?
Christelle, I'll jump in and then ask that Harmony really take credit for everything. And then also she fills in the pieces. But the home run we got in Murray District and picking up Harmony is that we started the school year with all of our teachers, every single elementary school, every single teacher started the year with a faculty meeting where she did an overview of ESL services and the reading of the WIDA score reports. And then she went into each individual PLC and met with those teams to talk about what those reports meant. And it was kid by kid, and really tied that back to the competencies and the assets, and then had the teachers go really deep with writing out the plans with students that then got shared with parents. And in the past, this has always been kind of a flyby, and it's been it's been inconsistent because it's been on the shoulders of our principals versus having the person who's the instructional coach for the school district be able to do that with each of the teams. The part of that ties into the ESL endorsement is that we've actually welcomed the opportunity to move away from our partnership with SUU. And instead, what we're focusing on is what are those things that we are asking of every single teacher that we want to get done the right way when it comes to instructing our ESL students. And the assessment piece ties right into that description I gave with what Harmony was doing at the beginning of the year. And that is, we're going to look at these reports and really determine kid by kid what the best instruction will be, and also set goals as to how we're reinforcing those language objectives. In addition to that, we still, as we're building out our courses with this, we also are looking at those things that are academic, that we need to provide either the best research, the best articles, the best readings. So we're not completely walking away from maybe that more academic approach, but instead we're just saying what actions at the end of that do we want to see from our teachers. We are still framing that around the 6 domains, but we are looking at those competencies that are embedded in each of those. And we really kind of started with the big question was, what do we want to see our teachers doing within those classrooms that are most going to impact the students? So one other thing that I would throw in there is that we are exploring how to get those teaching cycles, and whether that's a building level coach or that is Harmony instructional coach. Obviously, when we have 150 teachers at the elementary level, we can't have Harmony necessarily being in 30 classes all at once. So we are trying to look at how that framework plays out. But one of the things that we also talked about, in addition to the coaching component, was the lesson design, and really thinking about how to increase the engagement strategies, the opportunities for students to speak and engage with curriculum. So it's all together. And I know it kind of sounds messy coming from me, and maybe Harmony, you can give that a better description. But bottom line for us is that we've already started that work, and now we're saying, okay, what does it look like if you're a competent teacher addressing ESL strategies? Harmony, what would you qualify?
So I have already started with working with Robin. I started looking into how do we make a competency-based program. And I met with Monticello Academy and I said, okay, what are you doing that you feel is most beneficial and is supporting your teachers in a way that they are getting a really good competency-based ESL endorsement? And after having that meeting, it gave us lots of ideas of where we could go forward. We wanted, like Robin had mentioned, we wanted to make sure that they had a foundation as to why getting an ESL endorsement was important, what really the meat of why we want to get these endorsements and support these students. So the basis would be that we would have a precursor course that kind of gives them, that's more of this is the meat of it, this is why we do what we do, and then go into our domains where we're focusing on competency-based learning. They have the background to, this is why we want to get this done. Now this is how we're moving forward. We want to make it where teachers are creating goals based around those 6 domains so that they are leading their own learning, and that's where that competency-based comes in. We would be doing the coaching cycles where I or some other instructional coaches, part that we're still figuring out, would come in and see how are they working on this goal, what are they doing to achieve that goal, what have they changed in their classroom that is supporting those students. And then as they have to set goals for each one of those domains with family involvement, with building second language acquisition, all of those domains have to have a goal set and they're working towards that goal. Then at the end, they have to bring together a portfolio of everything that they have worked on that shows their competency and bring it before a panel. And that panel is going to justify, yes, you have met that competency for each of those 6 domains. Yes, you get to have that endorsement. So they get to see, they have to present themselves as an ESL endorsed teacher, what they are doing in the classroom that shows that they understand how to support those students. So that is where our drive is. We're not all the way there yet. Me and Robin are still working out exactly what we want, but those are the main pieces that we want inside of our competency-based endorsement. And like Robin said, including things we're already working on, making sure that that piece where we're identifying ILDPs, writing those ILDPs with specific goals, reiterating that with students right before the WIDA test, having them review goals with the student and with the parents, and then going into at the end of the year, showing the students where they're at, how they've done, and being able to have those conversations with kids. All of those things we want to embed within our endorsement as well.
So what I'm gonna say, Harmony, do you want to mute yourself? So thanks, Harmony and Robin. So what I'm gonna just give you an incentive to think differently about what you're actually doing. On the ESL endorsement, you'll see a list of districts that already have competency-based endorsements approved. Previously was usually through courses, right? But now you have examples from Monticello, from Wasatch, the beginning of Tooele's, Provo's, and Murray's. So I would really encourage you to think differently about the way in which you embed your professional learning for the ESL endorsement in the actual work the teachers are doing and not abstract theoretical constructs. So all the work that I've done on the USBE Canvas courses were focused originally on SUU and at UEN. And so some districts have taken parts of those courses from USBE and integrated into the work they're doing. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take those all those 6 courses and rework them with suggestions for competency-based and then put them in the Canvas Commons. So you all would have actual access to all of the updated research and everything else, and you can pick and choose. right? If you have Canvas as a way of doing professional learning. So the reason I'm saying that is it's always a challenge to get the most recent work and the best thinkers related to promising practices that work for your context, not something that's standardized, right, across a way that is supposed to be the best practice but has nothing to do with your context. So would anyone else like to share that? And the reason I'm saying that, it would be, all you have to do is think about this really clearly, ask for support. We could have another meeting with Monticello and Wasatch and all the other people who are already working on competency-based ESL endorsements. And then in the official document, your district would be listed as one already approved for competency-based, and all you would have to do is send in a letter with the names of the teachers who have completed their portfolio or whatever it is that you've designed, and then either me or whoever replaces me would just sign off, because it goes through the licensing department, right? It never really comes to me until it's processed through the licensing department. But if on the actual application your district is there, then you would be able to take local control of the way in which you actually work with teachers related to learning what each student needs, specifically related to their annual growth goal. So Karen is saying, my apologies, I'm headed out of town. Thank you. I will get a copy of, so I'm going to send all these materials to you. Robin is saying, having the Canvas courses will be a great resource to get started in the design. Right, I'm not expecting you guys to just like manufacture this on your own. I'm just actually giving you all the work that we've already done for the last 5 years. So anybody else want to say anything else in relationship to the competency-based ESL endorsement with pathways? So then it says, our districts who have programs, they would be willing to share their programs with us? And yes, I think I'll actually have a special section, and we'll have, besides Harmony and Robin and their development, we'll have Tooele, we'll have Wasatch, we'll have Monticello, because they're actually, if you ever want to see anything moving, when they do their final portfolio exhibition, and see the level of learning and the change in mind shift, their exhibition protocol is the most moving, inspirational work I've ever seen. And they've been doing this for almost 5 years. So we can have them actually discuss the way in which they move teachers from just tell me what to do and give me what to read to I'm going to set a goal in relationship to the actual students that I have. You see the difference? I mean, that's the different mind shift. And once you work on that, then you send me your proposal, and obviously the goal is to get the districts approved. So all you would have to do then is you would have control very specifically in relationship to the services provided, so that teachers would actually achieve their ESL endorsement based on the work they're already doing. So other comments, so Christy's saying, are the USB ESL courses still option for teachers? I have some wanting them. Okay, so the goal is to shift that to you all, right? Because the only person who's over all the USBE courses is me. Okay, so that doesn't make any sense, right? Because I might be here for a year or two. I've already put a deadline on it based on competency. Because the competency really, you realize that all the ESL endorsements, the way they have been done, they're because of the teaching and learning department and the rule for competency-based endorsements, you realize all those things are going to go away in June of 2023. So once they go away, then the pathways that we actually have in the endorsement already as a model, you can actually use to get your own program approved, right? So you have to think farther than Do you know what I mean? You have to think farther than what USBE is actually offering from these endorsements, because I'm the only one who's doing it. Okay. What else? So we're thinking about, sustainability and legacy. That's what we're thinking about. We're thinking about sustainable, relevant, immediately, what shall I say, personalized approaches to professional learning that teachers keep on asking for, right? They keep on asking for, why are you giving us all the same thing? Why can't we actually identify what we need in our actual practice? And that's what a competency-based ESL endorsement does. Okay, anyone else? So someone says, just curious, do you include any theoretical readings in competency-based? Is theory out? Okay, obviously theory is not completely out, but the point is, you're not going to change the research of Jim Cummins in relationship to embedded vocabulary based on the quadrants, because that actually works, right? And even though that theory from Jim Cummins and Steve Krashen was used when I was, an associate professor at Claremont Graduate School, that's the foundation for understanding how you scaffold instruction, right? So that's really the point. You don't throw out theory, based on whether you actually use theory that's actually good practice. I mean, that's the point. How is a theory implemented in relationship to the outcomes for students? So naturally, we had always used people like Jim Cummins and Krashen for language acquisition, as well as people like Jeff Zweers from Stanford and other people who talk about teaching academic conversations, right? I mean, that's just, I hate to say, unfortunately, my previous life was an academic, so I'm sorry. Okay, so she's saying thanks. The work of Kate Kinsella, I've worked with Kate and spent time with her, and that's very iffy. If you notice, she's very dogmatic and very, that doesn't really help when you look at advocacy in relationship to developing student agency. Very, very much complaint. So I'm not a big fan of Kate Kinsella, but you design your program based on what works for your students. But please don't design a program unless you've actually seen how it's implemented in the classroom, right? I mean, that's the point we're trying to get at competency-based. It's about competencies for the teacher related to what's actually making a difference for students to be assessment-capable learners. You use meta-analysis like Hattie's work. That would be an example. You don't want to hear any more academics. Any other questions? Or anybody else who wants to share what they're doing before we move to a really simple thing, and then we've been at this for a while. Any other comments? Now, I'm totally available for you, so please don't feel hesitant. You need to use me up while I'm here. Don't wait until I'm gone. That's not going to be helpful. Okay, so the last thing is some of the work that people have been doing in the biliteracy seal. So I'm just going to tell you one idea, and then, because there are LEAs, and Utah International is a good example. When I went to their graduation, there were 35 graduates, 4 of whom had full paid scholarships, and all of them post-secondary education opportunities, and from, 20 different countries. And they have a method of awarding a biliteracy or a multilingual literacy seal that's embedded in the actual work that students can do in their languages. And I sent that out to you so you could look at it. The biggest thing is, if you look at the requirement for USBE for the Utah Literacy Seal, the way in which they determine English proficiency is, I'm going to say, is the biggest issue. When we changed from the way in which WIDA was recalibrated, the 5.0 was even more challenging, and the only other state that used the 5.0 in their ESL plan was Massachusetts. And so we ended up using that based on a personalized proficiency scale related to when students come in and how they are proficient at the time that they come in. Now, the problem with that is, if you notice, and in the thing, in what I sent you, you can see it. By the time kids get to middle school and high school, the score that keeps them the lowest, they can be a 4.2, a 4.5, they can be 4.7, but the score that keeps them down from achieving the 5 is the speaking score. When I go visit classrooms at the secondary level, the only thing I hear is teachers talking at students, not students speaking, not students talking, not students engaged. So the old models of teaching content instead of students is pretty much predominant in every secondary school I visited in the last 5 years. Okay, and then it ends up showing in the WIDA scores as the pattern across all high schools is low in speaking. And then as a consequence, they never get a 5.0 composite. Okay, and that is related to lesson design as well as not understanding how to teach academic conversation at the secondary level. Not to mention in upper elementary, it gets worse after 4th grade. So, does anybody want to say anything in relationship to a commitment to lowering the proficiency score in the WIDA to a 4.0 to a 5? Like anyone who has a composite score of a 4.0 or 5 could be considered, right, from a local biliteracy seal or however you want to do it, they could actually be considered proficient in English. Could anybody say anything about that?
Well, Christelle, can I just ask a question with that? Because I've wondered this quite often is, do we have a measurement? This is Dave Gomez from Granite District, sorry.
Hi, Dave.
Hello, do we have a progress monitoring system or something out there that can help teachers to really understand what the speaking score is, how their kids are doing, and give them that information so that then they can move on? I haven't found one, but I have told you several times that we are looking at one right now and are piloting one right now. And hopefully that can be something that we can use to give to teachers, because how are teachers supposed to know where kids are if they don't have a progress monitoring system that can give them that information and then they can adjust their teaching? That's my question, and just something I want to put out there to think about.
Yeah, Dave, I think that's great. So tell me what you're piloting, and then we'll just open it up briefly. So tell me what you're piloting.
Oh, it's called Flashlight 360, and it's not really out there yet, but I've told everyone that we're going to kind of gather the data on, and then hopefully at some point near the end of the school year, we can let folks know so that you don't have to go out and pay for it, right? If it's not something that you need, if it's something that's worthwhile. We're using it in one high school, one middle school, and 2 elementary schools right now. And we're also using it with our parent organizations to monitor their English language learning. And so it looks at speaking and writing. And so I just want to put that out there, something that we are looking at, and we'll give a report, hopefully, Christelle, at the end of the school year, leading into next year, as hopefully something that will work. I don't know if it will, but my sense is there's nothing else out there that I've been able to see. And so hopefully this will give us a good direction to move into.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea about the way in which progress monitoring actually supports changed instruction. Another point is what Harmony and Robin are doing in relationship to meeting in PLCs and analyzing the way in which there are patterns in classrooms that show the speaking is low. And then key ways in which academic conversation can be integrated into the classroom. I mean, turn and share with your partner, often it obviously is not enough And part of that is the way in which the classroom is structured for the highest level of student engagement, as well as the way in which questions are asked. So and I think the other thing is the way in which administrators and instructional coaches use observation tools for continuous feedback related to what's happening in classrooms. So these are other ways, right? The fact that we go in and ask 3 students in every classroom, what are you learning today? Why are you learning it? And how you will be successful. And the students actually have no idea either what it is they're learning, why they're learning it, and they are pretty clear that they don't know what success looks like. So these are strategies that you can already use that have been created in relationship to what happens in the classroom with instructional coaches and with principals and other people who are doing observations, right? And the kinds of questions that teachers are asking that elicit the way in which students' behavior changes in the classroom. If you're just asking, simple questions that are just factual, you're never going to get conceptual learning related to academic language. So thanks, Dave, for sharing. And these are other methods that are being used to gather data to help teachers better understand the relationship between teaching academic conversations and the actual impact on, when they take the WHEATUS test, which some elementary schools are very good at, because most students, when they're speaking, they have no idea what they actually sound like, right? And so then there are some elementary schools who have done really amazing work in relationship to having the students speak and record themselves and then listen and then ask the question. So does what you're talking about show someone who doesn't know you how much you really are learning? So that simple question really supports the way in which students can listen to how they're explaining their learning, you see. And there are lots of places that do this. So this is Melinda. We like the idea of lowering the state exit for 4.0. Many other states are there. Yes, most states are, because of the recalibration, right, in 2019. This could be partnered with understanding that the teacher needs to continue some EL supports, but we like the responsibility shifts when students have so many competent skills when they are 4.0. All you have to do is go to the data gateway and just click on any student, and you can actually see what's happening. Even if you do it by classroom and grade level, you can actually see that the speaking scores that are actually connected to expressive language and writing are the lowest. Well, why are they the lowest? It's because the kids aren't talking about what they're listening to and what they're reading, which goes into comprehension. So why would you think they could actually talk about it or write about it? So you have to look at the relationship between receptive language skills, right, listening and reading, connected to what? Speaking and writing. All you have to do is look at the pattern. And once you bring that in the PLC and maybe show exemplary practice, you can help people change what they're doing. Otherwise, why would they change? I don't know. Because, it's safer to do what you've always done and maybe not understand that it's not about the student, but it's the way in which you're creating conditions for the kind of academic language that has to happen at the secondary level. So the question is, who determines that? Well, first of all, ESSA hasn't been reauthorized, right? And the only way you can do that, right now I'm just talking about changing the biliteracy seal English proficiency score. I'm not talking about the statewide one, because that would have to be a huge change and they're not accepting any kind of amendments to ESSA. And ESSA hasn't been reauthorized. It wasn't reauthorized the last time it was reauthorized, right, since 1962 was under Obama, right? So it wasn't reauthorized during the last 4 years, and it hasn't, and from my friends that I know at the Department of Ed, it's not on the docket for reauthorization probably in this term. That's the only way we could actually change it. I mean, as a state, right? As a state. I'm just talking about the way in which you determine English proficiency locally as a biliteracy seal alternative. That's all I'm talking about. Okay, anybody else like to say anything?
Crystal, I have a question.
Yeah, Thais.
So I really appreciated the honoring of oral language with this document with the biliteracy seal. But with that, do we need to, and if so, how would we determine when a student's coming from a language that is truly oral versus they're just not literate in their native language with reading and writing? Do we need to determine that, or are we just honoring that?
Okay, so that's a good question, and somebody's asked us. Christy Wagner from Weber said that they submitted an RFP for a progress monitoring tool for EL, and the only response was Flashlight 360. So this goes to kind of what Dave is saying. So here's the question: you realize that in the state, the state grid that shows what determines that there are contracts and approvals for any language that's simply oral. I mean, you do realize that. So it means all our native languages that aren't written. Navajo was written by Jesuit priests, right? And even people that I know, like Chuck Foster, who's the person who is Navajo, and his father was a code talker, he doesn't read Navajo. So if you look at indigenous languages, often those languages are only spoken languages. They're only oral. So determining that, and I'm just going to say this, and probably, you can, so my viewpoints are pretty clear to USBE. So even if you report me, it doesn't really matter. So I think the local, so we're always talking about local control, local control, local control. But then there aren't open pathways to actually get approval or to even do biliteracy multilingual seals that are determined by the local LEA. That's why originally the board rule was supposed to be really open for the LEAs to determine what that would look like. And there are LEAs who are moving that way. Utah International is just one example. So I'm going to say, you need to do what honors, if you want, all our heritage family languages to be extinct, well, that's up to us. I'm sure we don't want that. So the question ends up, what are you willing to do to ensure that family heritage languages are honored and respected? When I do focus group with families, you know what they say to me? They say to me they want their students to maintain their family language, but their students are so embarrassed they don't want to speak their family languages anymore because there's no benefit when they get to school. Now, I don't know how you feel about that, but that just doesn't seem in any way welcoming or responsive to the economic opportunity that we have for determining the way in which multiple languages are honored in Utah. Just look at the Utah World Trade Center. They have delegations all over the world. And wouldn't it benefit our students to actually be able to be teachers of their own language in really innovative programs across the state? Well, yeah. So that's my response. Anyone want to get on the bandwagon and provide a different alternative? I see Chelsea Maloof here, which I'm excited for because I've talked with Tiffany Hall about thinking about a district multilingual certificate. So, I know, as I said, I do a Zoom class with a student from southern India, and guess what? He's literate in 4 languages. And it's not just speaking, he also can write. Right. So anyone else before we leave? Okay, so I'm going to send the PowerPoint out as well as a link to the other ALS meetings where Ogden has shared their experiences in the RFP and the way in which they did cost benefit analysis. And I'll look at when we have another meeting, and I'll invite, it'll just be focused on competency based ESL endorsement, because you realize the time is like, you realize 2023 isn't very far. And so the new ESL endorsement is going to be up there, and you're going to have to decide whether you're going to take the experiences of people who have already implemented competency based with instructional coaches, as well as some coursework or whatever, and how you're going to do it so you can get approved before that transition happens. Because it's going to be June 2023, and it would be better if you ended up anticipating instead of waiting, and then none of the USB ESL courses will be available. Any other comments? So Jenny Cross, just to clarify, can we move forward? WIDA for qualifying English portion does not need to be approved by someone first. Just to clarify, she says, can we move forward with a WIDA 4.0 qualifying for English portion of this biliteracy, or does it need to be approved by someone first? Okay, so are you talking about the Utah biliteracy seal, or are you talking about a Box Elder biliteracy seal? Jenny?
I guess I'm probably talking about Utah seal of biliteracy. Or I guess I would need information on how to move forward with a Box Elder seal of biliteracy. So,
well, I think, I think the biggest issue is you would actually, what I actually gave you, and we're gonna revise it. I think Robin and a couple of us are gonna work together, and we're gonna revise my proposal. Personally, from my viewpoint, I'm not so sure you should actually wait for Utah biliteracy seal, frankly. I mean, I can make this case after we all decide on what that proposal would look like. I mean, I've already given people data, I've already showed them, but I'm not going to submit the proposal to Carl and Jennifer Thronson until we have more feedback from people.
okay.
So that's the other issue. But you can use that as a basis to show what alternatives can happen.
Okay. Thanks.
So then it says, will the 4.0 be valid at any point the student earns that is 5th grade like it is now? Connie says, thank you. Yeah, I think there are people on this call that are thinking about the 4.0 as a valid point very early on. If it's actually connected to the way in which kids have access to coursework. So this is what I've actually found. I'm not saying anything bad about counselors. I'm just saying about what traditionally has been accepted. When counselors see a student with a WIDA score, they will not let the counselor will not actually let kids in to advance coursework. That's happened over and over and over again. And, it's up to the school districts to work with, and high schools to work with counselors to look at it's the point about looking at the WIDA scores. And if you actually see they have a 4.0 composite, and they've had a 4.0 composite since they were in 5th grade, and the only thing that's keeping them back is speaking, then it's like any other student. It's like what Robin is saying. What opportunities do you provide for any other student when they come in and they ask for advanced coursework? You can't say no because you have a WIDA score that says you don't have a 5.0 composite when the counselor doesn't even know the actual experience of the students. So, and it goes back to this idea, of helping the counselors and the teachers be advocates for the challenging experiences that students and families want. Right? I mean, that's really the point. you know, Vygotsky and the whole thing about challenge. If you don't have sufficient challenge for the student's skill, why would you think students would be motivated? I mean, they just wouldn't, right? They give up unless you have kids going to other counselors to ask them to. That's what happened recently. I'm not going to say what high school. The student learning English who actually knows, who's literate in 4 languages, went to another counselor. And so, I don't know. Come on, let's think what's in the best interest of each of our students, right, and their families. And you can throw in for the economic development of Utah if you want to use that language. Okay, so thanks all for this really provocative, interesting conversation. I really appreciate it. And, you know, whether I'm here at USBE or whether I'm not, you can always give me a call. Okay? Okay, bye-bye.